And look, I already feel weird making this video because this leak was clearly an accident from Marquez. Seems like Rivian has already started sending out Quad Max R1Ts to a few select influencers, usually the pretty big ones. If you want me on that list, Rivian, all you had to do was ask. But I guess Marquez was not to showcase the charge port on this thing yet because he opened it up and clearly it's got a native NACS port. And he quickly took this video down shortly after posting it. So I'm guessing Rivian panically called him real quick and was just like, don't show that yet, because this tiny little port, which may not sound like a big deal and probably isn't a big deal to a large percentage of Rivian's customers, actually can cause a massive Osborne effect, meaning a bunch of people start holding off on purchasing their Rivian because, as most of you guys know, NACS is the future. Everybody's switching to it. The Ioniq 5 has already switched to it natively. One of GM's EVs, the Optic, has already switched to NACS, even though it's not in the right place. Lucid Gravity is also shipping with a NACS port as well. So we knew this was coming, but the big question was, when does Rivian formally adopt the native NACS port on their vehicles? And now it's looking like most likely the 2026 model year Rivian is going to be switching to it natively, and it looks like the quad motor version that they've been hyping up for a long time now, since last year, might be the first models that actually come with it natively. And I'm sorry for talking about it, but to kind of act like the leak didn't happen, that feels like just denying reality. Like, I know Rivian probably doesn't want us talking about this and drawing much attention to it because it does likely have an impact on present day sales and sales of inventory vehicles, which they kind of have a lot of right now. But since it's already out there and people are already talking about it, I knew my audience would be curious, especially when it comes down to the location, because at least over on Twitter, there were already a bunch of people upset that Rivian basically did the most basic NACS adoption technique possible, which was just to put a native port directly where the old CCS1 charge port was. And the main reason people are annoyed with that is because, well, most V3 superchargers, which are still the majority of superchargers right now, the cables are so short that if you try to plug in a Rivian from the front, you're basically guaranteed to be occupying 2 stalls, which is not ideal, especially when a lot of superchargers these days can get very packed and very full very quickly. So there's a few reasons I suppose Rivian may have just decided to keep the NACS port where it is, but obviously if you didn't want to occupy multiple stalls, the better thing to do would be either driver side rear or passenger side front. But maybe Rivian was thinking that, well, you know, V4 is the future anyway, and there's more and more V4 dispensers going in across the country, and those have longer cables, and with those chargers it doesn't matter if it's a non-Tesla, a Rivian will be able to park and have the cable reach easily for the most part, although I still have been to V4 dispensers that are laid out differently, and even when charging a Rivian you have to occupy 2 stalls, which can be weird, but that's more of an edge case. Maybe also Rivian decided the extra engineering resources was not worth it because there's going to be so many more V4 dispensers in the future, not to mention Iona growing their network. They have native NACS, they have longer cables, so it doesn't matter where the charge port is positioned. And I do think that at least in the case of the R1 products, because they're much more expensive vehicles with higher range, the R1T for example is getting 420 miles of EPA rated range, there's probably more likely to be people towing with the Rivian. It's definitely not an ideal scenario, but many have made the case that if you put the charge port on the front, then the road trip charging experience might be a bit better because you've got a trailer behind you and you can just pull straight into the charger. But again, I've been into many fast charging situations where even that approach wouldn't be ideal because it's a tight parking lot, you couldn't fit a trailer in there without completely blocking all the traffic, and again, some stations are just laid out differently. So putting the charge port on the front, while in some situations I could see it being an advantage while towing, it definitely doesn't solve all of the EV towing woes out there. But again, most people probably would have advocated for Rivian moving it to the passenger side front. That way it reaches easily all the V3 supercharging stations without having to occupy 2 stalls, and of course you could still tow and just be comfortable with your trailer blocking a lot of traffic. But because Rivian is so focused on having consecutive quarterly profits these days, I can see why they didn't want to overcomplicate the adoption of the NACS port. What it looks like from Marquez's video is almost like they just put the CCS adapter for NACS directly into the car. They also probably know that at least in the short term, there's gonna be a lot of adapter life, okay? Whether you buy a CCS Rivian or a NACS Rivian, the Adventure network is currently all CCS. They haven't been retrofitting those to NACS, so if you want to use a Rivian charger, which is more likely to be free for you if you're a Rivian owner that gets some referral credits, or the Rivian navigation has a bias toward towards Adventure Network chargers, it tends to route people to those. You're still gonna have to use a CCS adapter anyway, so maybe that's why they wanted the charge port door to stay the same. Didn't have to change the stamping piece or the motorized mechanism to open up the charge port door. So I will give Rivian credit. It's probably the cheapest and quickest and easiest way to adopt NACS. Some might say, well, it's good for the charge port to be big because if the Rivian was in other countries and had to use CCS ports, then you don't want to have completely different bodywork for that charge port door. But the truth is, that argument doesn't make much sense because Rivians are pretty much only in the US right now. They're not shipping them to Europe or overseas. So I think this mostly has to do with keeping part counts low and not having to retool all that much. But there certainly was a lot of people out there that I think were wanting a more future-proofed vehicle, and NACS was a huge reason for a lot of people to wait. Even though I've seen a ton of Rivian owners say it doesn't really matter because most of the time you're charging at home regardless, so who cares? You're going to be using the exact same cable every night. Who cares if it's J1772 or NACS? Plus, on road trips, if you're charging at ChargePoint or Electrify America or, of course, the Rivian Adventure Network, you're still going to be using adapters regardless, which is a fair point, but I will also confess that when you're paying that kind of money for a vehicle, you know, the average selling price of R1 vehicles, according to RJ, is somewhere around $88,000, okay? These are not affordable machines. These are very pricey, and Rivian puts a lot of attention to detail in their interiors and their software. Personally, I think they have the best interiors in the business. They are beautiful. I love their designs, and their software keeps getting better. I was just watching Out of Specs video about the new Energy app and how they've improved the charge curve on Rivians, although he's having a hard time showcasing it because Electrify America keeps falling down on him. So unreliable, so many failed charging sessions, so many lines, and it reminded me in kind of watching his experience that, you know what, this is not an $88,000 car experience. I know Rivian owners that sold their Rivian simply because they didn't like the charging experience. They didn't want to have to stop at every Walmart across the country, and there were often lines because typically Electrify America only has 3 to 4 stalls, and half of them aren't even working. So I understand why a lot of potential buyers out there were hesitant to buy a Rivian with CCS because they knew NACS is the future. There's way more NACS plugs on road trips that you can access that are reliable. There's usually way more stalls. They're usually way better uptime as well. I know from experience the last time I went on a winter road trip, there was ice and snow blocking the supercharger stalls, and Tesla sent out charging technicians in the middle of winter during the holidays in the middle of nowhere in Oregon just to clear out the snow so that people could charge there. And that's with a V4, so that applies to both Teslas and non-Teslas. So I just don't think there's a better DC fast charging infrastructure out there yet. Maybe Iona could catch up, and I hope Rivian can double down on Adventure Network chargers too, but having NACS on there I think gives people the extra peace of mind that, hey, I'm not going to have to fumble around with an adapter, and long term they know this is where all EVs are going and all EV chargers are eventually going to be. And when you're spending $80, $90, $100,000 on a vehicle, I think you have the right to care about future proofing a little bit, and you don't want to own a vehicle for 8, 10, 12 years that's going to require an adapter every single time you plug it in. So even for home charging, I would argue the NACS port is more convenient, easier to hold, easier to plug in, future proofs in case you want to buy different EVs down the road. You know everybody's going to be moving towards NACS anyway. So while yes, in the short term, having native NACS is probably going to annoy people because there's still going to be adapters needed, and at V3s you're probably going to be occupying multiple stalls, I do think it will become long-term much more convenient to not have to fuss around with adapters, not have to worry about charging limitations because of those adapters, and knowing that whatever EV you have at home, whether it's a Rivian, whether it's a GM or a Ford, long-term you're just going to have one cable that can charge any of them because NACS is the future. And in not too long, Rivian is probably going to start saying all new Rivians with the 2026 model year come with native NACS, not just the quad motors. And the downside of that is that people are probably going to prioritize that one over the CCS Rivians, which will likely be in inventory for quite some time, and Rivian might even have to apply inventory discounts on them. So if you don't care about NACS at all and you're perfectly happy with J1772, probably just wait a bit longer too. That's probably the issue with this leak, is that it motivates people to wait for CCS Rivians to get cheaper through inventory discounts, or it motivates people to wait until there's like a standard pack Rivian with a NACS port, because that's honestly the one I would get. I've road tripped a lot, and I know that range is kind of overrated when it comes to EV road trips. It's more about charging, and I'm more interested in cycle life. So if it were me, I'd be buying an LFP battery Rivian with a NACS port, but some people who do towing care more about the total range. I get it. Feel free to let me know how you guys feel about Rivian's choice to just put NACS exactly where CCS was. Do you think this is a fair way to keep it, or do you think long term they should consider moving it like they did with the R2? R2. In my opinion, R2 is less likely to be towing because they only said the max range would be over 300 miles, so I'm guessing it's gonna be kind of low 300s, but all those thoughts, feel free to let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.